In the last days of May 2026, less than 3 weeks before the biggest football tournament in human history was scheduled to begin, FIFA did something it almost never does. Quietly, with no press conference, no announcement, and no official standing at a podium to explain himself, it began cutting the price of World Cup tickets. Not for a single unpopular fixture. Not for one half-empty stadium in a forgotten corner of the schedule. For all 104 matches of the 2026 World Cup at once. And at the same moment, behind the scenes, it handed back roughly 70% of the hotel rooms it had block booked across 11 American cities, rooms it had been certain, only months earlier, it would need for the greatest sporting spectacle ever staged. Organizations do not quietly slash the price of the most sought-after product on earth when demand is overwhelming. They do it when something has gone badly, quietly, catastrophically wrong. To understand what went wrong, go back to a single number FIFA itself put in writing years before a ball was kicked. When the United States, Canada, and Mexico submitted their winning bid to host the 2026 World Cup, they made a promise. A seat at the final, the most expensive ticket in the entire tournament, would cost at most $1,550. That number was not marketing. It was written into the official bid documents, the papers that convinced the world to hand these three nations the tournament in the first place. It was a commitment. This, they said, would be the most accessible, most fan-friendly World Cup ever held. Now hold that number in your mind. $1,550. Because by April of 2026, the cheapest standard ticket to the final was not $1,500. It was $5,785. The most expensive official seats had climbed to $10,990, and then, as the tournament drew closer, those figures tripled. On the resale market, individual tickets were listed for more than $2 million. The promise of the accessible World Cup had not been bent. It had been shattered, and the pieces had been sold to the highest bidder. How does a ticket go from a promised $1,500 to a real-world price that would buy a house? The answer is a phrase that most football fans had never heard before this tournament, and will never forget after it. Dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing is the same system that makes an airline seat cost $400 in the morning and $900 by the afternoon. The price is not fixed. It floats in real time based on demand, pushed higher by algorithms every time interest spikes. Airlines use it. Concert promoters use it. And for the first time in its history, FIFA decided to use it on the World Cup, the tournament that has always sold itself as the game of the people. Understand exactly how that machine works, because the mechanism is the scandal. An algorithm sits behind the checkout page, watching in real time how many people are chasing each seat, and every time interest surges it nudges the number upward, hunting for the absolute ceiling of what a human being will pay in a moment of longing, and then charging exactly that. Applied to a concert, it is aggressive. Applied to the one tournament that has always called itself the game of the people, it was something closer to a betrayal, and fans felt it as one. To see what that actually meant, forget the numbers for a moment, and picture a single person. A father in a city like Kansas City or Guadalajara who has followed his national team his entire life. He has watched every World Cup since he was a boy, always on a screen, always from a distance. This time the tournament is coming to his continent, maybe to his own city, and for the first time he can imagine taking his son to see it in person. He saves for months. He plans. And when the tickets finally go on sale, he does what hundreds of thousands of people did. He joins an online queue. He waits. Not minutes, but hours. And here is the cruelty fans reported again and again. As they waited, they had no idea what they would actually pay. You could queue for hours not knowing whether your tickets would cost $200 or $2,000 by the time you reached the front. And when the father finally arrives, the number is not the one he planned for. It has climbed while he waited, driven upward by the very demand he was part of. He closes the laptop. The trip is over before it began. Multiply that man by millions, across 3 countries, and you understand what was really happening in the stands. Because here is where the story turns, and where it stops being about numbers on a website and becomes about the tournament itself. The empty seats. When the World Cup finally kicked off, television cameras began showing something that was not supposed to be possible at a sold-out global event. Gaps. Whole sections of empty red seats in the middle of matches. During Canada's group stage draw with Bosnia and Herzegovina, the cameras found them. During Qatar's draw with Switzerland, they were impossible to miss, even though the official attendance was announced at 67,966, in a stadium that holds 68,827. On paper, almost full. On screen, visibly hollow. FIFA was forced to respond, and its response told you everything about how deep the problem ran. Official attendance figures, it explained, reflect the number of tickets scanned, not, in its words, visual assessments of seating occupancy at any given moment. In other words, the tickets were sold. The seats were paid for. The people simply were not in them. Some, FIFA suggested, were standing in the concourses. But there is another explanation that fits the evidence far better. Tickets bought by speculators and resellers, gambling on a $2 million payday, that never found a buyer at all. Think about what that resale figure really tells you. A seat listed for more than $2 million is not a price, it is a bet. A speculator hoarding inventory and waiting for one desperate billionaire who never arrives. And while that gamble plays out, the seat sits empty, locked away from the thousands of ordinary supporters who would have filled it in a heartbeat. Seats owned by no fan, watched by no one, glowing empty under the lights of the most expensive World Cup ever staged. And there is a bitter irony buried in this, when you only see if you know your history. The last time the World Cup came to the United States, in 1994, it did not struggle to fill its seats. It shattered records. That tournament still holds the highest average attendance in the entire history of the World Cup, more than 68,000 fans packed into stadiums per match, in an era before the internet, before online queues, before a single algorithm ever touched a ticket. More than 3 decades later, the game is far richer. The stadiums are grander, and the technology is everything 1994 could only have dreamed of. And the seats are empty. Nothing about the world's appetite for football shrank. Only the price of being allowed to watch it changed. This is the part they did not expect. Dynamic pricing was supposed to squeeze every possible dollar out of demand. Instead, it strangled the demand itself. Just 2 days before the opening match, there were reports of 180,000 unsold tickets. 180,000. That is not a rounding error. That is entire stadiums, empty, with less than 48 hours on the clock. And that is the number that finally forced FIFA to do the unthinkable, to quietly cut prices across all 104 matches and hand back the majority of its hotel rooms, hoping no one would notice the panic behind the decision. But people did notice. And this is where the story escalates from a business failure into something far more serious. Because pricing a fan out of a football match is one thing. Doing it in a way that draws the attention of the government is another entirely. In the United States, the attorneys general of New Jersey and New York, the top law enforcement officials of 2 of the host states, opened a joint investigation into FIFA's ticketing practices. Not a complaint. Not an angry letter. A formal probe by the same kind of office that investigates fraud and consumer abuse. The body that promised the most accessible tournament in history was now under scrutiny by American prosecutors for how it had sold that promise. A World Cup meant to be a celebration had become, in part, a legal matter. And the criticism did not only come from outside football. Miguel Maduro, the man who once served as FIFA's own governance chief, brought in to clean up the organization's reputation, publicly criticized the pricing strategy. When the people you hired to protect your integrity are the ones warning you that you have lost it, the problem is not a misunderstanding. It is structural. Now, to be fair, there is a case to be made for FIFA here, and honest journalism has to make it. Dynamic pricing is not automatically villainous. In theory, The same system that pushes prices up when demand is high also pushes them down when demand is low, which means some fans genuinely paid less for less popular fixtures than they would have under the old fixed-price model. FIFA can also argue, with some justification, that the sums generated by premium seats fund the global game, the federations and youth programs in countries that could never pay for them alone. And no host wants a half-empty stadium. No organization sets out to televise its own failure. These are real arguments, and they deserve to be heard. But here is where they collapse. A promise was made in writing, a $1,500 ceiling, and it was broken by nearly 4 times over. A system meant to find fair prices instead went looking for the exact breaking point of human desperation and charged it. And the proof that it went too far is not a matter of opinion. It is 180,000 unsold tickets and stadiums full of empty red seats. When your own product goes unsold at your flagship event, the market has already returned its verdict. This is the myth-busting moment, the thing you were told versus the thing that actually happened. You were told that the 2026 World Cup would be the biggest, richest, most successful tournament of all time, a festival of football spread across a continent, a celebration for every fan on Earth. What actually happened is that the sports governing body looked at the most beloved event in the world and saw not a celebration but a market to be optimized. It treated a father's dream of taking his son to a match the way an algorithm treats a hotel room on a busy weekend, as a price point to be pushed as high as it would go. And the fans, the people the game claims to serve, responded the only way they could. They stayed home. And the empty seats became the honest scoreboard of a decision made in a boardroom. There is a deeper pattern here, and it did not begin with the tickets. Even for fans who could somehow afford the price, a second wall was waiting. The border. Consider the supporters from Morocco, one of the proudest footballing nations on the planet, whose team had electrified the previous World Cup. Dozens of Moroccan fans who had already bought their tickets, who had already paid, had their travel visas denied without explanation. Ticket in hand, money spent, and still turned away at the paperwork. They were not alone. Fans from Haiti, from Iran, from Senegal, from the Ivory Coast found themselves facing bans and restrictions. Travelers from the Democratic Republic of Congo were caught up in it too, tangled in health rules tied to an Ebola outbreak. And it was not only fans. It reached the officials of the tournament itself. Consider Omar Abdulkadir Artan, a referee from Somalia. Not just any referee, the best male referee in African football for 2025, and about to become the first Somali ever to officiate at a World Cup. He landed at Miami International Airport ready to take his place at the tournament, and he was denied entry. Border officials declared him, in their words, inadmissible due to vetting concerns, and sent him back. A man invited by World Football to help run its greatest event, stopped at the door of the country hosting it. Then there was the Scottish fan whose story captured the sheer cruelty of the timing. He had planned his trip for months. He reached Manchester Airport. And 1 hour before his flight was due to leave, United States authorities revoked his travel authorization. Not at the border. Not on arrival. 60 minutes before takeoff, with his bag packed and his heart set on the tournament of his life, the door was closed. He never even boarded the plane. Now layer these two forces on top of each other, and the empty seats stop being a mystery. A pricing algorithm engineered to charge the maximum a human will bear, and a border that turned away paying, ticket-holding fans from continent after continent, together hollowed out the crowd. One April report found that 80% of hotels across the 11 American host cities had bookings running below forecast. The empty seats were not one failure. They were the symptom of many, and the ticket scandal was the one FIFA could not blame on anyone else, because FIFA built it, coded it, and pushed the button itself. So what does it mean when the most powerful sporting organization on the planet breaks a written promise, prices out its own supporters, leaves stadiums half empty at its flagship event, and ends up under investigation by the very governments that welcomed it? It means the quiet price cuts in late May were never really about tickets. They were a confession, an admission made without words that the strategy had failed, that the greed had been seen, and that the people had voted with their absence. The World Cup has always sold itself on one idea, that for 1 month, the whole world stops and watches the same game together, rich and poor, in the same stadiums, sharing the same roar. In 2026, that idea collided with a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet won the boardroom but lost the stands. So let me leave you with a few questions, because a story like this only matters if we actually sit with it. When the game that belongs to everyone is priced so that it belongs only to those who can spend millions on a single seat, is it still the same game? Was 2026 a one-off mistake, or the moment the World Cup quietly stopped being for ordinary fans? And if the empty seats really are the honest scoreboard of that decision, what should football demand before the next tournament makes the very same choice? Leave it in the comments. I read everyone, and I genuinely want to know where you land on this. If this is the kind of story you want more of, a quiet like or a subscribe helps more than you would think. Because football at this scale is never just a tournament. It's a moment in time.